The doctor suspected that they were precancerous, right? Precancerous. And so this really brilliant, well-trained, licensed medical professional prescribed them antibiotics. And so that was the answer that I got. It was like, well, what do you mean you were diagnosed a year ago? What have you done in the last year based on what you know? And they go, well, I haven't done anything other than follow my doctor's recommendation. And I said, well, what was this brilliant, genius, world-class doctor's recommendation for you after telling you that they thought you might be developing a cancer? And said, well, they gave me a course in antibiotics. Okay? Now, I don't know how much you know about cancer treatment or any kind of treatment about things like this. I'm not going to assume that you know anything. Maybe somebody in here is really a ninja oncologist. Every once in a while I get ninja medical doctors in class, okay, who don't disclose that they're actually cancer doctors or orthopedic surgeons or... I do. Actually, it's quite often. In the last year, I've had acupuncture doctors, chiropractors, whatnot, in class who never said a word about it before they were in class. Okay, ninja. And I think sometimes what they're trying to do is they're trying to see if we're flaky or not, or if we're real or not, or for whatever. I don't think they have a genuine desire to learn initially. I think, or they would have fair disclosure. They'd be honest, right? But let's set that aside for a second. The doctor who suspected this person of having a cancer a year ago prescribed a course in antibiotics. Okay? Now, I want to tell you this flat out. So if you ever run across this, there's no antibiotic on the planet, never has been, is not now, and never will be, an antibiotic that will treat cancer, or that will cure a cancer, or that will reduce a cancer, or will do any such thing. That is Dark Ages malpractice kind of stuff. All right? So when people say the science, the medicine, and they'll criticize us for being unscientific, we're not real medical, even though I'm a medical doctor. By the way, you guys get that, right? I have an MD. Okay? So when I'm talking about these things, I am allowed to have an opinion about bleeding malpractice because I have an MD. But I also have 4 other medical doctorates also would support that. And all of the work that I have, education that I have, and let's say the 3 international conferences on cancer remediation that I personally have presented at as a keynote speaker in the last 2 years, not one single reference to using antibiotics to treat cancer because cancer is not an infectious disease. Antibiotics, what they're for is in their name. Biotic. Bacteria. Biotic means bacteria. Antibiotics are only if they're effective at all, and they're not always effective. If they're effective at all, they're only effective against a bacterial infection. And if you don't have a bacterial infection, to prescribe you antibiotics is malpractice. But it's common. For example, it's a statistic according to CDC. Don't take my word for it. Go to cdc.gov, okay, and look it up. Look up statistics on prescription of antibiotics for flu, prescription of antibiotics for common cold. 80% of people who go to a doctor or a clinic or a hospital with flu or cold are prescribed antibiotics. 80%. 100% malpractice. That means 100% of the side effects of those misprescribed antibiotics the doctor is liable for, including the occasional death. Do you know that people occasionally die as a result of being prescribed or given an injection of antibiotics? Do you know that? That every time you do a course in antibiotics, there is a slight risk of dying. Okay? So, if you're prescribed antibiotics for something that's not a bacterial infection, and you die, that is 100% iatrogenic mortality. That's 100% physician-caused mortality. 100%. That's on that list of the 800,000 people this year that will be murdered by their doctors. I know, I'm not supposed to use the M word. It's not PC. Okay? But you know, in every other course of life, every other industry, if you go to a dry cleaner's and the dry cleaner's kills you, or you die as a result of your interaction with the dry cleaner in picking up your laundry, that is considered murder. You know that? Do you know if you go to a restaurant and you order a salad, okay, and they bring you your spinach vegan salad with the vegan salad dressing, but it is highly contaminated with salmonella or E. coli, and you die, do you know that's a homicide? That's a homicide. Somebody's going to jail for serving you that poisonous salad. If you go to the gas station to get gas, okay, and an employee at the gas station offers to assist you and accidentally douses you with gasoline, and then as they run away, there's a buckle on their boot that causes a spark that causes you to burst into flames, that's murder. That's a homicide. Somebody's going to jail. Do you know, in other words, in anything, you go golfing, right? And you have a golf coach or an assistant who's going to help you improve your swing, and you get up to the ball and they line up and they're going to help you hit the ball harder, faster, further, and they accidentally hit you in the head with their golf club and kill you, that is a homicide. And somebody's going to jail. Do you know? In other words, even if it's accidental, if you're driving down the road going to Sunday school and you accidentally run over a grandma and her 3 babies and kill them, that's a homicide, and somebody's going to jail. Do you know that? Even if you're sober, doesn't matter. Drunk, sober, doesn't matter. Okay? So how is it that doctors routinely off 800,000 people a year through misadventure, misinformation, misunderstanding, and absolute, complete, total mistakes as if they have no clue what they're doing, and they don't all go to jail? And we still consider them the gold standard of healthcare. The gold standard of healthcare, right? How's that possible? But, you know, that's because we live in an upside-down world. We live in samsara. It's like the Buddha said, we live in the world of pain and suffering. And so, what my conversation in one point is a little bit pedantic or given, in the sense of, since we live, part of the answer to why is this so is because we live in the world of pain and suffering. So that pain and suffering's got to come down to us one way or the other. Right? And so it's going to come down to us from any given direction. And especially, it's interesting, the paradigm of suffering caused by medicine and by the medical system and by medical practice, especially. Isn't that interesting? 800,000 people a year killed, accidentally or otherwise, by good people. See, here's the thing. I'm not saying all these docs are bad people. Did I say a word that they were bad people? That they don't love their kids? That they don't go to church and they don't go to meditation and they don't practice yoga, and they don't, they're not environmentally sensitive, and, did I say a word about any of that? Absolutely not. It's just that the practice of Western medicine is corrupt from the top down. And we've been promoted and propagandized and indoctrinated to accept it as is. And how many people have seen the movie Soylent Green? So maybe not recently. All right, so write it down. Everybody needs to see Soylent, S-O-Y, Soylent, L-E-N-T, Soylent Green. Because Soylent Green is really interesting. It's really interesting. And the reason it's really interesting is because it takes the current system that we have and projects it into the future to its likely conclusions. First of all, the medical system people vote against their own self-interest. You have to understand that people do that, Trump. I won't say anything else about it, but people vote against their own self-interest. But it's the idea that, for example, in the future, medicine has determined that one of the ways to save cost on medical care is that since most people who get sick are older, then what we do is when you turn a certain age, we just euthanize you. Kill you on purpose. Why kill you accidentally? We just make a law so that when you turn 50, you got to turn yourself into a euthanasia center and you're just put to sleep. Because that's humane. See, you're not going to get sick, and everybody else has saved the cost of your health care. Wow, how about that? Perfect solution to health care, see? No old people dying of cancer, because there's no old people. All right? In order to solve the food shortage, since people were against GMOs and all this other stuff, eventually what they do is they take all these millions and millions of people that they're euthanizing and they turn them into crackers. And they are the food solution of the future. So cannibalism is the solution for the nutrition problem of the planet in the future. And so on and so forth. And in order to propagate these kinds of really horrible, weird ideas, okay, all education is controlled by the government. All communication of information is controlled by the government. All books that are not on an approved list are banned, and there's only 4 that are approved. Period. Another good movie is, well, first of all, we think of George Orwell's 1984. Of course, we're past 1984. But it is a good book to read, because if you read that book and then you consider the culture and the society and the medical system that we're subjected to, it's going to make sense. Because in 1920, George Orwell predicted that it was going to be like this. Because in the 1920s, it wasn't like this. Because that's before the 1930s, mid-1930s, and Congress creating the FDA and changing all the laws about the practice of medicine in the U.S., following the Flexner report, Abraham Flexner, and so on and so forth, where they changed the paradigm to a profit-based system in 1 year. See, in 1934, medical care in the United States was based on compassion and religion. In other words, most hospitals in the U.S. in 1934 were owned and operated by churches. Catholic Church, Protestant churches, other churches. Most hospitals in the world in 1934 were operated by churches. Why? Well, because churches invented hospitals. So up until the 1930s, hospitals were run by churches, because churches invented them. Okay? And those hospitals were charities. And the doctors were priests and ministers. And the nurses were nuns and ministers. Most famous one that comes to my mind that you'd be familiar with is Florence Nightingale. Florence Nightingale was a Catholic nun. That's what she was. That's where the Red Cross comes from. Okay? Again, don't take my word out. You can wiki Florence Nightingale. You can wiki Red Cross. Why is there a cross, and why is the cross red? And where does that come from? It actually originated in our order, the Knights of St. John of Lazarus of Malta. That's actually where both Florence Nightingale and the Red Cross originated. That's where they originally came from. Okay? Our order still survives. Knights of St. John, in the Sacred Medical Order of the Knights of Hope. Our modern iteration, if you will. But until 1934, medicine was charitable, philanthropic, and was based on concepts of practical expression of love, care, and compassion. And that was true for every country in the world. That was true for Southeast Asia. Thailand, for example, up until the 1950s, there was no payment required for medical care, per se. What people would do is they would make donations to the temple. And temples, Buddhist temples, provided the health care. Buddhist temples provided the health care. Buddhist temples provided what we call social services. Buddhist temples ran all the orphanages in the country, and always had. One of my teachers, one of my meditation teachers, who they had an anniversary of his death while I was in Thailand. I was so happy to be at the temple to sort of, I don't know, you celebrate the anniversary of someone's death, but it was a celebration. And I call him Potty Pot because his name is 20 syllables long. Papitarat Pratanam Wat Prakal Dantau Sutadaram, etc., etc. Pratera, Piripat, Pitarat. You know, I'm like, I just called him Potty Pot. He would just be like, just call me Potty Pot. And I'm like, okay, Potty Pot. Anyway, he died a couple of years ago, and they had a big celebration of his death. But he was one of the 5 patriarchs of Thai Buddhism. Thai's not like Tibetan Buddhism. There's not one titular head of the Buddhism. Like the Dalai Lama is what's called the titular head of Tibetan Buddhism, right? Acknowledged head of Tibetan Buddhism. Even though there are many different schools of Tibetan Buddhism, there's not just one. Okay? However, in Thailand, it's not like that. Thailand is Theravada Buddhism. It's run by a committee. There is no one person. There is no one patriarch or one elder monk or Rinpoche, as you might say, or one pope kind of thing. That's not how it works in the Theravada system. Okay? In the Theravada Buddhist system, there's a group of elders who are called patriarchs. All of them are abbots of temples. So, and they're all elder. In other words, they have substantial lineage as far as time in, and many of them have been monks since they were babies. Okay? Children, literally, 4 or 5 years old. And now they're in their 60s and 70s and 90s and whatnot. Okay? Patipat was one of 5 elders that govern Buddhism practice in Thailand. Okay? And he had several hundred temples under his authority. several hundred temples under his authority. But his, if you want to say specialization as a patriarch, was he was in charge of the welfare of the children monks, what I always call the baby monks. All right, by and large, there's mostly one category of baby monks, although there may be possible other. But mostly the baby monks are orphans. They're what happens to children who are either their parents die or they're taken away from their parents and they have no relations and so on. They're not abandoned and the government takes no responsibility for them. Never has. Why? It didn't have to. Because the temples, if you were an abandoned child and you're discovered in an area of one of these functional temples, you would be gathered up essentially by, we would say social workers, but what they are is they're lay monks or practitioners, sometimes like white robe people or they're just supporters of the temple, and they will get the children and they take them to designated temples that specialize in the welfare of children, and there are many in Thailand. Okay? So there's tens of thousands of monks that are only 5 years old. They're cute as pie. I mean, oh my God, the baby monks. And being in a temple, by the way, is the perfect environment for a child, especially one who's come from a distressed situation, because it is safe. It is safe. There's supervision. There's discipline. There's exercise. And there's fun. In other words, if you ever go to one of these temples that have these children, the dominant sound in that temple is laughter. The dominant sound, the background sound of what you hear is laughter. And you know what? That's a good sign. That's a good sign. Patipat was in charge of the babies. I won't tell you how I got hooked up with him. That's a long story. But to make the long story short, his thing was, it is an obligation of sacred people, of spiritual people, to take care of the children. It is not the government's responsibility. Government's responsibility is for safety, security, military, and money. Economics of the country. But the society's welfare is up to people, not the government. And they had a system, and still have the remnants of the system is still functioning, for thousands of years where governments would come and go. See, this was the thing. Governments would come and go. Kingdoms would change hands, but the temples survived. The temples abided. There are temples that are 1,000 years old that have gone through wars and famine and have gone through a dozen different governments ruling the land where the temples are located. And those temples are still functional even to today because they had functional systems and social systems. So medicine is one of those systems. Up until the 1950s, formal clinical medicine was something you went to a temple for. And there were designated temples in every region that had what they called medical sala, or pavilions, or areas where volunteers practiced medicine and trained with experts who were also volunteers, many of whom were monks, because the monks were the best educated people in the country. Best educated, just like King Rama III, for example, wrote and read and spoke 8 different languages. But he was a monk until he was 45 years old, from a very young age. He renounced being a monk, took off his robes to become King Rama III. He was a master astrologer, he was a medical doctor, an expert in Ayurveda medicine and traditional Buddhist medicine before he became king. And he was typical. In other words, the monks have always been the best educated people in the world, in the lands where the Buddhist system prevailed. Okay? Because Buddhism has always stressed education. But then Buddhism is about handling the question of suffering, both personal suffering and global suffering. Right? And so that's where the practice of medicine has to occur. See, the practice of medicine is the natural extension of a compassionate heart wanting to practically express love and compassion with real people who are really suffering in real time. And medicine is an answer to how do I do that? Now, it's okay for me to be introspective and self-absorbed with my own suffering, and it's okay for me to work to reduce my own suffering. There's no harm, no foul. That's not a crime, and that's not an indication of low character. It's not being selfish. It's a starting point for everyone. Right? I won't say everyone, because some people get on the path of working on themselves because they have a crisis of empathy about someone else's suffering. And they see maybe some suffering around them or with a family or friend or something like that, and they want to help, but they realize they're messed up. How can I help you? I'm too messed up to help you. So, but I want to help you because I love and I care about you. So, in fact, I love and care about you so much that I'm going to stop drinking, that I'm going to stop being violent, that I'm going to stop making stupid decisions so I can be helpful for you. That happens. That's a thing. See, it doesn't matter how you get into the circle. Self-centered, selfish, or just out of heart of compassion for someone else. Doesn't matter. Why? It's a circle. All roads lead to Rome. You're going to get to the compassionate heart no matter how you come to it. But medicine and therapy has always been the go-to place for sacred people and people who worked on themselves, who had the slightest little inclination toward compassion, the slightest bit of empathy for others, and was always functionally necessary because an ordinary consequence of life, we get injured all the time. Just going about our life, not up to anything in particular that's harmful or whatever, just being a person in life, we get injured. We get infected. We fall in things. Things fall on us. You know, we fall out of the boat sometimes because we're trying to get that close-up of that heron like Bonnie does. Sometimes I worry about her. She gets these pictures of these water birds, and I'm like, well, you know, you see enough pictures of water birds, it will occasionally occur to you that the photographer has to be near the water. And so sometimes I worry. Because I could see sometimes a photographer who specializes in taking pictures of water birds may occasionally fall in the water. And in Florida, we have alligators in the water. Oh, memorial to Bonnie today. Oh, gosh. Sadly, she was eaten by an alligator while trying to take a close-up of a baby heron, which looks like a fuzzball with legs, by the way. If you see one of these gray herons or one of these red-headed herons, are huge, huge, huge birds. And this time of year, they have 2 babies if they're lucky. And those babies are about this tall, and it's a big fuzzball with legs. And it's just like, the second you see it, you're going to go like, oh. I can see Bonnie trying to get a picture of a couple of babies like that, and then next thing you know, we're having a memorial and something about alligators. Okay? But just an ordinary course of life, we get injured, bum knee, whatever. Okay? So out of compassion, in the sense of all pain and suffering causes distortion of the mind. All right? This is a Buddhist concept. We learn about this in Vipassana Bhavana. all pain acts as an interference pattern and causes a distortion to the way that you think. So for example, if you have to make XYZ decisions today, okay, about anything, it could be what to eat for lunch, or it could be something with your kid, or it could be something with your income or livelihood or job or whatever. But if you are in pain while you are making that decision, you will make a different decision than you would have if you weren't in pain. How about that? And what we believe is, based on experience, based on having studied this with millions of people for thousands of years, is that the decisions that you make when you are in pain are not as good as the decisions you make when you are not in pain. Now, I can't quantify it. How bad are they? I'm not saying they're all bad. I'm just saying they're not the same, and they're not as good. They're not as clear. You cannot think clearly as a mental process if you are in pain. And then pain is really interesting because we have active and latent pain. Active and latent. Active pain is right now, this minute, you are aware of it as a thing in you. Active pain. You're aware of it as a thing in you right now. You can see it. You can hear it. You can feel it. You're aware of it. By the way, I find it interesting. In my mind, pain is always an entity. And this is traditional Thai medicine. In traditional Thai medicine, another word for pain is it's a kind of quan. Okay? It's an entity like a ghost that lives within you. It has a mind of its own. It has a preferred place that it likes to live. It has a voice and it communicates. So all in the Thai way, this is very traditional stuff I'm talking about. Pain talks to you, and sometimes constantly, as in like a little voice in the back of your head. And that voice is distracting, and the voice is confusing. And this is part of this idea of why when you have pain you don't think clearly. It's because there's another voice in your head other than your voice, other than the one that should be. There's another one in there. And its conversation almost always is negative. Its conversation almost always is depreciating, negative, self-depreciating, externally depreciating, cynical. Pain is cynical. Pain says there's no hope in life. Pain is the origin of despair. The voice of despair begins in a conversation of pain. And so, buddhi means the mind. The mind. Because the theory is that, yes, we have mind-body-spirit continuum, right? Mind-body-spirit continuum. But the body is in charge. And the body's always in charge. The body's in charge. The body is mostly responsible for every bad decision you've ever made in your life. I mean your physical body. According to Chinese medicine, we have 6 hollow and 6 solid organs. Okay, you with me? 6 hollow and 6 solid organs. That's how all the organs in the body, including the endocrine system, are divided up in Chinese medicine so that they can relate to the meridians. Okay? But the one thing, I'm not going to give you a big lesson on organs or meridians, but what I'm going to tell you is, in the Nanjing, it says very, very clearly, over and over again, not just one time. It says it very many times, and I've read the Nanjing several times, cover to cover. It says that every organ has a voice. It says that every organ has a personality. And it even describes the personalities of the different organs. And the reason it describes them in such detail, okay? I'll give you an example. Here's a kind of a paraphrased classical description of the lungs in the Nanjing, okay? In the Nanjing, the big red book, the Bible of Chinese medicine, right? In the Nanjing, the lungs are described as a bureaucrat, an officious, pompous bureaucrat who is in the royal court of the emperor and whose job is to determine who gets access to the emperor's ear, who gets access to the emperor's physical presence, who gets access directly to the voice of the emperor. So it goes on. Even describes how this bureaucrat dresses, flamboyant and big, and takes up more space than you would think should be appropriate for this person. And so it describes the lung as a person, okay? An officious bureaucrat, which acts as an intermediary, an absolute barrier to someone from the outside getting access to the emperor on the inside. And so there is a real functional reason for this, okay? Even like our president has what's called chief of staff. So if you want an appointment and actually to sit down with the president, the way you get that appointment is you write a letter or make a phone call to the chief of staff or to his secretary. Okay? And then they look at your request, they look at who you are, what you want, what you bring to the party, and then they make a determination whether your issue is substantial enough and interesting enough or compatible enough that they're going to let you have a sit down for 5 minutes with the president, much less a lunch date. Do you understand? And that goes on all the time. And it has to. So president, quote unquote, represents the whole country. So the whole country can't just show up at his office with an issue. Right? There are levels of intermediaries to get to that point. And why do you want to get to the president? Well, because you have a special interest. And if the president likes you and wants to support your special interest, then that's like worth more than gold. Might actually be worth millions of dollars. Just an off comment or a tweet might actually generate millions of dollars of income for somebody, or lose, or cost. Okay? The lung is like that. The name of the lung, the energy of the lung, the consciousness of the lung is called Wei Qi. The Wei Qi. And the Wei Qi is the energy that permeates mostly the outside of the body, the surface of the skin, even off of the body. And actually what the Wei Qi does is it acts as an energetic interface, ameliorating, which means tuning, changing, altering, adapting, and or acting as a barrier to harmful influences that might cause you harm, which could be anything from sunburn to bacteria to virus to whatever. That it's the Wei Qi that protects you. In scientific terms, we equate the Wei Qi with the immune system. We say that the function, that what the Chinese medicine is describing as a function is the same thing that immunologists are describing in a human body as the function of the immune system. We talk about how genius it is and how your immune system actually knows every virus that every human has ever been exposed to since you were a mud bug in the ancient primordial oceans, and has a record of that. There's a lot of talk about measles vaccinations and herd immunization, and how if you had measles when you were 4 years old, your body still remembers that and will recognize it and adapt to a measles infection in real time even though you haven't seen a measles since you were 4 years old. Okay, that's pretty smart. So that intelligence, that if you want to ascribe intelligence, that's being anthropomorphic, but ascribe intelligence to that function in traditional Chinese medicine, that is the Wei Qi. All right, and so that official has a voice because he has the emperor's ear. That's lung. So how much of the rattle around noise in your head every day, all day, is your lungs talking to you? Is the function of your lung? Is the function of the lung protecting you from harmful influences from your environment or from your skin? Something got on your skin, it's trying to get inside. Or something got in your sinuses, or because the Wei Qi is not just the exterior of the body; it's the interior of your sinuses, esophagus, mouth, throat, larynx, stomach, intestines, right out your rectum. In other words, from the point of view of the Wei Qi, we're a big flesh donut, right? Because we have an outside and we have a hole that goes all the way through the middle. Okay, that's called a torus. It's a toroidal energy field. Okay, if you want to get into some other ideas about the Wei Qi. Okay, it is our personal magnetosphere. If you look at the diagram of the magnetosphere of the planet, and you'll see that it is a toroid, a donut. Okay, with North Pole and South Pole at the center of the toroid, but it's an elongated toroidal shape. Okay, guess what? Your Wei Qi, if I were to draw just the energy field of that lung energy and meridian, would also be a donut. Okay, because we're hollow. We have one hole that goes all the way through. Okay, but the lungs have a voice, and it's the voice of the immune system. It's the voice of dealing with external stress. It's the voice of dealing with internal stress. For example, you ate something that had some pathogenic bacteria in it. Just a little bit. Maybe not enough to actually make you sick, to have diarrhea or whatnot. Maybe, but just enough that your body knows that it's there and is handling it. Does it do so quietly? No. Does it do so without informing you? No. It's like a child. The Wei Qi is like a child. The lungs are like a child. They are communicating to you all the time what they're doing. And that is part of the background noise of our mind. That's part of the background noise of our mind. The white noise. And guess what? Now we have 11 other organs. All of which are talking to us all the time. And they take turns. Technically, every 2 hours, a different organ gets the stage, gets the microphone. It's like an endless open mic. You know, open mic at the bar or at the coffee shop. Okay, and there's 12 participants, and every 2 hours, each one gets to get up and have the microphone for 2 hours. So, how's it going out there in infection land, in immune system? Yeah, we're talking about infections today. We're dealing with some gut dysbiosis and pathogenic bacteria in the gut, and we got a little UTI thing going on. It's just in the back of our head, you know, a little burny little thing. We know we have a UTI, so it's always on the radar. You know what I'm talking about, right? You know what I'm talking. And for 2 hours. And then large intestine follows lung up on the stage. Whoa, man, that salad yesterday had a little bit too much salmonella in it. I'm dealing with it. You know how it is when you're dealing, but just barely dealing? Like, you know, like if you just didn't handle it, like for a minute, that all hell would break loose. Large intestine has a mic for 2 hours. But lung didn't go away. Lung's the heckler. Ha! If you let me do my job, the bacteria never would have got in the gut. I told you not to eat that. Lungs in the background, heckling, large intestine. And this is all 24/7. Most of what you think is this kind of conversation. That's what Vipassana Bhavana teaches us. It teaches us that most of what we think is our mind is not. In fact, it's our organs. It's our body talking. And the trick, what we want to do over time, is learn how to separate. Because there is something there. You do have a mind. It's just kind of hard to see sometimes. You have your own mind. A lot of the conversation that goes on inside of us is tapes. And what I mean by that is literally as if you had a tape recording of a conversation or of a few words that you said a year ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And those few words were recorded on an indelible media so that they would never be lost. And they were flagged in such a way that in certain circumstances, which could be almost anything, those words would play as if, and in such high fidelity, stereo, with the subwoofer and the whole 9 yards, so that as those words play, you have the impression that the words are being spoken right now. But they're not. They're being played right now, but what you're listening to is a tape, a recording of something that was said or something that was thought years ago. Mostly having to do with very particular events that happened to you at very particular times. Like if we really could go Inspector Clouseau on all this, I could eventually tell you a time, a date, a place, and a circumstance where the first time you heard those words in your head. The very first time. And it might be in a geographical location. It might have to do with a physical body part, something that actually happened to you, a circumstance of life that took place, but in some strange way, there was an emphasis on your body in some way, which could be postural, but could also be an actual injury, which could be a threat of an injury that was so real that you imagined that it was real, to so much of a degree that it is now permanently and indelibly stored in the tissue. Because that's what tissue is, by the way. It's like we don't look for the subconscious mind. I'm going to come back and talk about this a lot later, but we don't look for the subconscious mind like psychologists and psychiatrists do. We gave that up a long time ago. Why? Because we know exactly what and where the subconscious mind is. I don't have to look for it. I don't have to look for your subconscious, to dig into your subconscious. Your subconscious mind is your body. It is the physical tissue of your body. It is the muscles. It is the tendons. It is the bones. And like I was describing before with the Wei Qi of the lungs, it is your organs. That is your subconscious mind. And everything that's ever happened to you, every word that you've ever... See, and here's this Buddhist concept. We say thought, action, and deed. That you're held accountable for every thought, action, and deed that ever transposes your physical location from the moment of conception to the moment you die. You're held accountable for every thought, action, and deed. Well, okay, some people say that's kind of morose. But actually what I want to postulate for you is what this is describing is a mechanism of what the tissue is and what the tissue does. You, your body, is a human biologic, biochemical, electromagnetic, transformational machine. And the way that you collect information from the environment is through your body, and the way that you transpose and transmute and change that information from higher to lower and lower to higher, etc., is also through the machine. Every atom of your constituency, every atom of every cell, of everything in your body has the capacity to store information infinitely. Your body is mostly made up of silica. Silica is quartz. Quartz is mimetic. Again, Dr. Marcel Vogel, don't take my word for it, proved that you can store information in crystal. And in fact, the future state-of-the-art of digital storage for computers and computer technology and for AIs, the storage medium for AI technology, because it needs such a high volume of storage, like as in mega, giga, terabyte kind of storage, which doesn't get too hot, okay, and is not too big, is in crystals. Crystalline matrix. Crystal is the storage medium of the future. Computers will not have hard drives. They will have a crystal. That crystal, or a crystal matrix, is what will store the information. Why? Because it can store it in quantum levels, which means virtually infinite amounts of information. And doesn't get very hot. Part of the reason why you get hot is the same reason why a hard drive gets hot when you operate a computer. To store, to read and write to a mechanical hard drive takes energy. There's an exchange of energy. That energy is called an EMF, electromotive force. And it produces a thermal quantum, and that's heat. That's why computers get hot. By the way, that's why you get hot. Only in you, we call it metabolism. Tapes. Everything that's ever happened to you, every conversation you've ever had, every place you've ever been, everything you've ever seen or smelled or felt is still within you in real time. Your whole entire life is within you in real time. Now, we don't access it all in real time, because that would be cacophony, and that would be crazy, and that would be insanity. And by the way, that's part of the schizophrenic equation. It's not that you're crazy, it's that you're getting too much information from too many disparate sources, and there are too many of these voices which take the stage. See, if everything's orderly and the organs take the stage one every 2 hours, then our play makes sense, and the programming is livable, is doable, is sustainable, okay? But if all of those 12 actors get up on the stage at the same time and start telling jokes all at the same time, well, we're going to have to shut them down because it's going to make us crazy. Somebody's going to get hurt. Do you understand? Everything that's ever happened. And part of the storage mechanism that determines what gets priority storage is emotion.